but welcome to Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, chapter 42. And the title of our lesson this week is On the Path to Reverence. You should have a book like this, the Practical Tanya, in front of you, as well as the handout for this week, which is 2 pages. And then we also have this week a little bonus of the song we just listened to, A Little Bit of Moses in Me. For those that are tuning in online, you can find that song by the 8th Day Band, titled A Little Bit of Moses in Me, on YouTube, with a beautiful music video that goes along with it, actually directed and produced by my good friend Mendel Katz, who some of you may remember from the Torah Through the Arts film evening that we did. He did the music video for this video. Mm-hmm. Pens, yes. I actually believe they're outside from the JLI. They were left there in the front. Thank you, Yosef Ilan. And so in the song we just heard, we spoke about the fact that we have a little bit of Moses in each and every one of us, and as Baron so beautifully illustrated, I think, or enunciated, what many people I think here were tapping into or tying into, is that we each have a little bit of Moses in us, that we can harness that power and use that to sort of overcome battles that we have. And that's one of the points that's going to be discussed in this week's chapter, and probably, definitely for the first chunk of it, that's what the Alter Rebbe is going to talk about. But just to give a little bit of flow and a little bit of context, because everybody here has been to previous lessons of Tanya. So again, on the map of Tanya, what we're holding is we're learning about reverence currently, right? We're in this 10-week series, we're trying to talk about love and reverence, love and fear of God. And thank you. Oh, really? Okay. Okay, perfect. Oh, we have enough. Perfect.
We got 2 more there.
There we go. Perfect.
Oh, perfect.
So the topic here today is love and reverence, right? Loving God and revering God, which, as we explained, are necessary ingredients if we want to properly serve Hashem. And just to recap, last week, one of the points we mentioned, actually the Alter Rebbe does not mention it in the chapter, but Rabbi Miller mentions it in his commentary, that it's important to remember, and this is based on other things that the Alter Rebbe says in other places, it's important to remember that there are always going to be 2 levels of reverence. Obviously, as with anything, there can be thousands of different micro levels, but on a generalized level, there are 2 different categories, or two different depths, let's call it, measurements of depth, that we can have in our relationship with God when it comes to reverence. In Hebrew, these are called Yira Tata and Yira Ilah, which means a lower fear of God, or a lower reverence for God, and a higher reverence for God. And as we mentioned just briefly last week, what? And as we mentioned last week, the difference is that the lower reverence is essentially trying to achieve a basic sense of submission to Hashem. Does that make sense? A basic sense of Hashem is my king, Hashem fills the entire world, He sees and knows everything that I do, therefore I have to do the right thing. A higher reverence would be internalizing that so that it's no longer something external forcing me to do something against another will that I have within myself, but rather it's seamless and it's one and it's internalized within me, not the topic that we discussed last week or that we'll be discussing this week. For the most part, what we are discussing here is achieving step 1, a basic sense of what we call Kabbalat Ol, which means accepting the yoke of God, so which is it's integral that come from us. In other words, Kabbalat, that we accept upon ourselves the yoke of heaven, that we want to do what Hashem wants. And step 2, recognizing that Hashem is the all-powerful King, supreme ruler over the entire world, and therefore we should listen to everything He says. Right? And that, says Tanya, tried and proven, if thought about enough, and from enough angles, and for long enough, and without distractions, will arouse a reverence for God, fulfilling the verse that it says that we should fear God. Okay. In Devarim, which is what the Alter Rebbe opens up with today, the Alter Rebbe mentions, again, we're talking about the lower reverence here, right? The Alter Rebbe mentions that there's a verse in Devarim which says as follows: Ve'ata Yisrael, we're on page 523. Ve'ata Yisrael, and now, O Israel, Ma Hashem Elokecha shoel me'imcha, ki im liyirat Hashem Elokecha. What else does God ask from you except that you should fear Him? Moses is in the middle of, for lack of a better word, rebuking the Jewish people, giving his last will and testament. The whole book of Devarim is that. In the middle, he turns to the Jewish people, and actually we say it in some of this is one of the verses that we quote before. I don't know why, but it's one of the verses that we quote right before we begin the Grace After Meals, right? So we right before we wash our hands with the Mayim Achronim, we say this verse. What else does God want except for the fact that you should fear Him? And the Talmud in Berachot right away asks, only? The only thing he asks is that you fear Him, is that you have a reverence for Him, is that you develop this emotion for God? Are you treating, is this Atu Yira Milsa Zutra, so he asks the Gemara, is fear, is reverence for God, is a proper emotion of awe and reverence for God, is that small fry? Like that's like easy for us to do? Like that's the only thing God asks you to do? How terrible is it? How hard is it already? And the Gemara answers that because Moshe Rabbeinu was the one doing the talking, so therefore the answer is yes. For Moshe Rabbeinu to attain a level of lower reverence, for Moshe Rabbeinu to attain a level of being able to fear God, to have a reverence for God, and for that to drive his mitzvot, wasn't such a big deal. So yes, he was talking to the Jewish people, and to them it's a big deal. But to him it wasn't such a big deal, and that's the answer. The Alter Rebbe asks, simple question, right? In Yiddish they call it a klutz kasha. Klutz kasha means like you knock on wood, klutz means like a beam of wood. And the Alter of his words, he says like this. He says, the words that he uses are Ma havaya elokechem shoel me'imchem. Or me'itcha. What is the thing that Hashem asks of you? Moshe Rabbeinu is not sitting here and showing off or giving a little summary of what he does in his service of God. He's asking the Jewish people what they, right? He's telling the Jewish people, he's referencing to the Jewish people what they should be doing as part of their service of God. So if you're talking to me and to Elise and to Abraham and to everybody in this room, to regular normal people like us, it's not such a simple thing. I don't know if anybody else. For me, I'll speak for myself. It's not such a simple thing to attain an actual fear of Hashem. One of the opening questions that we asked all the way at the beginning of this whole series was, how can I love or fear or have a reverence for a God that I can't see and I can't hear and I can't speak and I can't have a relationship with Him like with other people? And so here is where the Alter Rebbe introduces this concept that Moshe Rabbeinu was not just a spiritual leader of the Jewish people, but he was a true leader of the Jewish people, what we call a Raya Mehemna, or a trusted, a faithful shepherd. Let's read inside a little bit. Starts from the Tikkunei Zohar. Irit, you want to read for us a little bit? On page 524.
Tikkunei Zohar states that Moshe's soul extends into every single generation, into every tzaddik and scholar who immerses himself in the Torah, even to the entire generation, 600,000 of them. This refers to a spark of Moshe's soul which extends into the tzaddik or scholar when he is studying Torah. To help him understand its correct intent, Rabbi Shalom Buzaglo.
So this is quoting the Kisei Melech, and continue, because he quoted the Tikkunei Zohar. And then Rabbi Chaim Vital expands
this idea beyond the context of Torah scholars to all souls which are included in Moshe, since it is from his soul they all are derived. They are all sparks from him, Etz Chaim. The Tanya will argue in this chapter that the Talmud statement that reverence was a small thing for Moshe, our teacher, was referring to the spark of Moshe's soul within your soul.
So really, every single one of us has a little bit of Moses in us. And to that little bit of Moses, what?
Excellent.
Yeah, I know. We're in good hands, huh? I feel like the Allstate commercial. You're in good hands. Yes, 100%. Every single one of us essentially has a piece of Moses' soul inside of us. And then that little bit, from that perspective, looking at us through the lens of that spark, or that power, is the word you used, through that energy, to that, if we can tap into that, using Baron's words, because he phrased it beautifully at the beginning of the class, if we can tap into that, then Yira, true reverence for God, will actually be Milsa Zutrasa, will be a petty and easy thing for us to achieve. Okay, so as you see, this is not a one-man show. There's like 4 or 5. I mean, this is probably a who's who of the greatest Kabbalists of all time. The Tikkun Zohar and the Eitz Chaim, Rabbi Chaim Vital, the Tanya, of course, right? The Talmud, the Zohar. All these places are all quoting the same concept, that there seems to be this concept, and however much it affects us is going to be the discussion we're going to have now, that every one of us, certainly a Torah scholar, when he learns Torah, when he immerses himself in the study of Torah or in the doing of mitzvot, and even by extension of that, says Rabbi Chaim Vital, every single Jew, because Amcha Kulam Tzadikim, every single Jew is essentially a tzaddik, is essentially a Talmid Chacham, so every single one of us has a piece of Moses in us. What about that? Right. So because exactly. So because every single one of the Jewish people are essentially tzaddikim, every single one of us has a piece of Moshe Rabbeinu inside of it. Okay, great. Like Pam says, I feel uplifted already. But what is this piece of Moshe doing inside of me? How does it work? What, for that matter, before we get into what the piece of Moshe is doing inside of me, let's talk about what Moshe does in general on a spiritual level. Right? We know he was the spiritual leader of the Jewish people. We know a lot of physical things about him. Like we happen to know he was 10 cubits tall. Random fact, trivia, Jewish trivia from the Talmud. We happen to know that he took the Jewish people out of Egypt. Whatever, he's got a resume. But what was his role? Again?
Nothing. No.
But what was his role? What is the character? Like when we talk about a spark of Moshe inside every single one of us, don't go around thinking now, whenever I see a puddle, I have some sort of spark inside me that can split it, like that I can walk through and not get my suede shoes wet. Right? No, that's not what it means. So what does it mean, right? So in order to do that, let's try to figure out what was Moshe Rabbeinu's role in the Jewish people on a spiritual level.
He gave us the law.
The Alter Rebbe is going to, don't worry, the Alter Rebbe is going to answer for us. So the Alter Rebbe says that he was one of what we call the Shiva Roim. Who were the Shiva Roim? The 7 shepherds. So I apologize for doing so much reading, but these are very nuanced and delicate subjects. I really want to make sure we give them the proper justice. So we'll turn to Yosef Ilan. If you could read for us what the Zohar teaches about the 7 shepherds on page 524, 3 paragraphs on the bottom.
Oh, I lost it there. 524.
Mm-hmm.
Page turned on me without my requesting it. Okay. The Zohar teaches that corresponding to the 7 divine emotional attributes of God created on earth, truly worthy men to sustain the attributes and to illuminate them on earth, and they are the fathers of the world: Abraham, Yitzhak, Isaac, Yosef, Moshe, Aaron, and David. Addendum to Zohar.
Well, that's what comes from, right? For differing views over the identity of the 7 shepherds. So there's different opinions on them, and you can see that in the Talmud, and you can see that in different versions of the Zohar, and they're discussed all together in one place in the Rebbe's letters. The Rebbe at one point addresses them all. Anybody recognize these 7 names?
Yeah.
These 7 shepherds are also the
fathers. Our fathers.
Yeah, they are our fathers. Well, not all of them. Only 3 of them are our fathers, technically. The rest of them are teachers and whatever, kings. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are our fathers.
Yeah.
Anybody recognize this sequence of names from anywhere?
Yeah.
Super.
From where? Very good.
Okay.
The Yushpizim, the guests who come to our sukkah every single day of Sukkot, are these 7 shepherds. Now, but what are these 7 shepherds spiritually? So let's focus on the most important reason why we came to this Zohar, which is that God has, right? We know that we were created in the image of God. So just as we have 10 attributes, God has 10 attributes. 7 of those attributes are emotive, right? They're emotional. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut, etc. Now, because God wants that those 7 emotional attributes should actually be connected to the world and should actually be sustained inside the world, so therefore He created different people in the world throughout time that they will sort of shepherd or channel these emotional attributes, and they will be the physical manifestation of a human being doing that here in this world. Right? Many of you will be familiar with this concept from random different things, even historical things that you're familiar with. So, for instance, Abraham Avinu was most famous for
Hospitality.
hospitality, right? He was kind. He was kindness. He was chesed. Many people will also be familiar with this from Rabbi Hanoka's sukkah. If you've been once or twice, whatever night you're there, he'll usually talk about that guest, and here in Shul he'll talk about it in the sermon, living with those guests. So each one of those guests has their perspective. Yitzchak was known for being Gevura, which is discipline. Yaakov was known for being Tiferet, which is a perfect blend between the two of them, etc. Okay, so all of these people, they draw down these different emotional attributes from God, these different energies from God to the Jewish people. They sort of gift them to the Jewish people. Who was Moshe Rabbeinu? Right? So look at the list. Moshe Rabbeinu is there, and he technically fits into Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod. Technically, Moshe was Hod, which is beauty. But Moshe Rabbeinu is also referred to as the general one. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu being the leader of the Jewish people, the one who was there when the Torah was given and who brought us the Torah, right? The Torah was given through him, and many other little things besides that helped the Jewish people turn into a nation. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu is considered the general one. So in other words, a little bit of all of them is in Moshe Rabbeinu. Exactly. He has them all in him, and he brings them down. No, this has nothing to do with Kol HaShvim Chavivin. Nothing to do. That's a whole separate point. In other words, another word to use for Moshe Rabbeinu would be Das. So Das is not one of the emotional attributes, but Das is the father of all emotions, right? Anybody remember Das? Das is the third of the three intellectual attributes. Chachma, Bina, Dat, Chabad. The third one, Dat, is sort of the transistor, right? The transitional from the intellect into the emotion. And as we mentioned before in Tanya, that Das is not so much knowledge, which is the literal translation of the word Das, but rather knowledge in a way that it actually becomes part of you and you can internalize it and it starts to develop into an emotion. A better word for it, as we always use, is connection. Dat is a connection between our intellect and our emotion. Similarly, with Moshe Rabbeinu being Dat, he is the connection between the divine attributes and the mundane and material attributes that we have inside of us, right? The chesed that we have inside of us. And the chesed that there is by Hashem, Moshe Rabbeinu connects the two of them. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu connects the Jewish people with God in order to help them get their spiritual energy. So Moshe's job is to nourish our das, our sense of personal connection to God. In other words, he has the ultimate das. He connects to divine das, to the supernal das. And through his soul, because he's one of our shepherds, he connects to every single one of us. Are we spiritual enough yet? Kabbalistic enough for anybody yet? No, you can't blame me. It says it right in the title. It says it's a Jewish mysticism class. No, but we're going to try to bring it down to make it practical. So the level of your connection with God is, in general, right? Even leaving Moshe out of the picture, the level of your connection with God is always going to be dependent on your das, right? Why? Because das is your ability to connect. So the more you're in tune with your das, the more you're in tune with that, what we would call in English, connection, or that consciousness of godliness in your life, the more you're going to be able to connect with God. Moshe Rabbeinu stirs that consciousness. Moshe Rabbeinu feeds that or fuels that das that we have. How does he do that? Because he connects to the godly das. So he serves as our intermediary between the godly das and the mundane das that we have. And he says, okay, let me make this connection strong. And he inspires our das in this sort of Isarusa de Le'ela where he comes from above and inspires it. And then we can then use that to connect to God.
How's his das different from Abraham's?
Because Moshe Rabbeinu, of all the seven shepherds, was the general shepherd. In other words, he included all of them within him. Okay. Also, Moshe Rabbeinu was a leader for all the Jewish people. Abraham wasn't necessarily. I mean, at the time he was, but he didn't embody it in that same way. His job wasn't das. It wasn't nourishing the Jewish people's inspiration to God, which essentially is the job of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, so you wanted it, you got it. What is Moshe Rabbeinu's spiritual role in this world? What is the job of a true leader of the Jewish people? To nourish the das of the Jewish people. Let's use even simpler English words, right? Let's avoid Hebrew completely. Inspire the Jewish people to be connected to God. Arouse the hearts of the Jewish people that they should want to connect to God. That's what a Moshe Rabbeinu does. Now, this does not mean that we kick back And we say, great, so Moshe Rabbeinu is doing all the work.
No,
So we do we want? No, of course we have to do the work. But what is the point here? The point here is that everything still fluctuates and differentiates based on our das.
Mm-hmm. Nothing
Nothing changes. It's still about us, and it's still about our connection with God, and it's still about how much we actually do the connecting, how much we're in tune with our own das. So what Moshe Rabbeinu can do is he can inspire within us that we should connect more to our das and therefore connect more to God. Get more in tune with our consciousness of God and actually connect that way.
That way, you see, we don't all say ira tata, the different ira tata and ira. What's the difference? I don't understand the concept.
It's beyond the scope of today's lesson. For now, we're talking about Yira Tata. We're trying to get to what it means, a lower reverence, and why it's actually attainable for every single one of us. So, for those of you that are following inside, we're on page 527. So now we're holding, so that Moshe Rabbeinu, that soul of Moshe Rabbeinu, comes down into this world and embodies itself in many different sparks among all the Jewish people, as he read for us so beautifully from the Zohar. And every single one of us has a little spark. And depending on how in tune we get with that spark, that's how much we can connect to God. Now let's talk a little bit more about das. Because the word das means knowledge. So where do we get this concept that das is like this intimate connection and our ability to connect to God, etc.? So first of all, I will point you directly to one of the first times that das is actually mentioned in the Torah. It says, Adam yada et Chava, which means that Adam knew Eve. That's the terminology that's used for the first time that Adam and Eve were with each other as man and wife and gave birth and conceived. The term used was Adam yada et Chava, that Adam knew Eve. So just to give a little more perspective as to what we're talking about here, when we talk about connection to God, and we talk about the fact that das, that Moshe Rabbeinu was inspiring das within us, and because Moshe Rabbeinu's the sparks of Moshe Rabbeinu's soul are now embodied within each of us, and we can harness that power, we're talking about a deep, intimate connection with God, not just I believe God exists, and then I move on. The test always given for this is when you meditate, you spend some time thinking about God, and you actually reflect on His embodiment in this world and His effect on our lives, etc. Attempting to inspire, let's say, a reverence for God or an emotion towards God, an emotional connection with God. And you are successful at that. In other words, so at a certain point, it should be just like a physical object. Literally just like with a physical object, we can do our best to think about it, right? Even if the physical object is not here, but the more we think about it, the more we meditate about it, we can even envision it in our mind's eye, and then that leads to a development of an emotion. Similarly, that's what we're striving for, a real tangible emotion like that for God, a reverence for God. Now, what's the problem? What's the problem with that? Like, why? So why are we not all constantly revering God? The problem with that is that we're not just made up of a soul. We're not just made up of das. We're not just made up of a spark of Moshe. I mean, we also have a body and a material life here in this world, which stands in our way. And it doesn't stand in our. I mean, it's in the way, but it's there. In other words, it takes exactly. In other words, it takes effort to take that meditation and that intense connection with Hashem and push it beyond the obstacle of the physical. And this, says the Alter Rebbe, comes with how much effort is put into the way we meditate. And this, I think, is fascinating. I know that some of you have asked me before about meditation and tips for meditation. This is where the Alter Rebbe mentions some of those. He's mentioned meditation many times and even given us different, sort of anchors of what to base our meditation off of. But here he talks about like the methodology behind it, like literally, so how do you do it? Elise, you want to read for us a little bit?
27?
We're on page 531.
Okay.
Right? So he says, he says only despite, on the bottom of 530, he says, only despite this inherent potential of your soul connection with Moshe's soul, since your soul is placed into your body, An enormously great and intense effort is required, doubled and redoubled, to tap into that potential. And the Alter Rebbe uses 4 different types of terminology. Enormously great, intense effort, doubled and redoubled. Go ahead.
To suggest 4 distinct elements in your efforts to achieve da'as. Enormously great effort indicates that a large quantity of time needs to be dedicated to this meditative work.
Okay, rule number 1. You want to meditate properly? Don't be impatient. Don't do it while you have 5 minutes while you're waiting at the DMV. I wish 5 minutes while we're waiting at the DMV. At the DMV might be a good place to do it because you have an hour and a half. But 5 minutes, you're waiting in line at the cleaners and you decide, this is a great time to meditate about God. 5 minutes in, you're like, you haven't even gotten to the tip of the iceberg. Designate time for it. Number 2.
Intense effort suggests that the meditation must be of a high quality and great depth.
Number 2, don't just think about, for a long time, repeat in your mind the same concept. Yeah, God exists. You want to get deep here. You want to think about God from different angles, from different perspectives. You want to flesh it out. You want to think about God as the ruler of the world. Alter Rebbe is going to give us more words here soon, a fleshed out idea here. But for now, just generally, you want to think about the world and how God created the entire world and how God must supersede the world and exceed the world. You know what's good? Anything we spoke about in Tanya for the past 42 odd weeks, right, with all the breaks, that's good material. Right? How often do we do that on a regular basis, just thinking about that? We come to the Tanya class, it's great. We sit and we talk about it. We're like, yeah, that makes sense. If God created the world, he must be greater than the world. And if he's greater than the world, then did he need the world or he didn't need the world? These types of thoughts. Thinking about God's greatness in creation. Wow, creation is so detailed. He created the world. Alter Rebbe is going to give us more details later. But make it deep. Make it high quality. Don't make it like a superficial, gloss over kind of thing. Number 3.
Okay, the work is doubled in that it involves both the body and the soul.
It shouldn't be something that just involves your soul and your body. Your body should be in tune with what you're doing, using your mind, using your heart. It's not an outer body experience, number 1. Number 2, put yourself in a comfortable position to be able to meditate. Put yourself in a comfortable position to be able to, eating and drinking is pretty important from before. Make sure you have eaten and drunk well. Meditation, as we've discussed, for the most part, is done in the Jewish sense during davening, right, or pre-davening. And one of my favorite stories is about actually a Rebbetzin in Chabad, not a Rebbe, the daughter of the Alter Rebbe, who's I think it was the daughter of the Alter Rebbe. His name was Rebbetzin. I actually think I might be mixing up who it was, but no, that's what it was. Rebbetzin Devorah Leah, who was the daughter of the Tzemach Tzedek, correct? No, the mother of the Tzemach Tzedek. That's right. There was the mother of the Tzemach Tzedek, who was Rebbetzin Devorah Leah. I believe I got the name right now, but if not, you'll have to pardon me for that. And basically, the story went as follows. So she was told by the doctors that she needs to start eating earlier in the day. She had some sort of issue, and she really needed to make sure she was taking care of her body. She wasn't taking care of her body well enough, and she was told she needs to start eating earlier in the day. So the doctor, knowing that she was a Rebbetzin and she was very much in tune with her spiritual service of God, and she used to pray every single morning, the entire Shacharit, the entire morning service. So the doctor told her, as doctors do, right? They don't just say, you got to eat. No. He said, Rebbetzin, let me ask you, what time do you get up in the morning? What time do you daven? So she said, let's say, this I'm making up, right? Let's say 7 a.m. I daven at 7 a.m. So he said, I want you to eat every day at 6:30 a.m. Now, for context, in Shulchan Aruch, it's described that one of the laws about davening, in order that this should be one of the most important things in our day, we do davening even before we eat. So you're not supposed to eat anything before davening. Drinking is okay, eating not okay before davening, especially if you want to sit down for a meal, for a breakfast, you get carried away, and then davening ends up schlepping out, and before you know, you did this and did that, and davening ends up being one of the last things on your list. Again?
If you eat before davening, if you have more koach, but when you go...
We're talking about this. This is exactly what we're talking about. So Rebbetzin Devorah Leah, I believe it was, so she came with this great idea. The doctor said to eat at 6:30. Her son or father, whoever it was, the Rebbe told her she has to listen to the doctor. So she said, great, I'm going to eat at 6:30. I'll get up at 4:30, daven, and then, or whatever the timing was, I don't know, whatever, get up even earlier, I'll daven, and then I'll... The doctor got wind of it, and the doctor told the Rebbe. And the Rebbe came over to her and said, and this, the reason this story is famous is because it's quoted in a Yom Yom, this line. Besser essen fahren davenen, wie davenen fahren essen. It is better to eat before davening than to daven before eating. Now that's loosely translated, because the word fahren, similar to the word for in English, like for is for and before, right? The way that's the thing. So in Yiddish, it's basically the same word. The word for and the word for before are the same word. So he was telling her in the same sentence, better to eat before davening than to eat after davening, but also better to eat for davening than to daven for eating. In other words, better to spend all of your time during eating saying, I'm eating now like that I should be able to daven properly, I'm nourishing my body like that I should be able to serve God with my soul, than to spend all the entire time during davening thinking I need to daven quickly like that I can eat because the doctor said I need to eat by a certain time, etc. In other words, we have to recognize the priorities here, right? So I think that ties very well into number 3, which is doubled. That involves both the body and the soul. This is not an outer body experience. This is not like a knock the body out of the way and get your soul work done. And number 4 is it has to be redoubled, since in both areas, body and soul, 2 types of effort are required, as the Tanya will now clarify why there's 2 things that are needed in both body and soul. One of them is Yegias Basar. We have to figure out a way to work hard, to invest effort with our body, bodily effort. In other words, to reduce our material involvement with this world, right? To figure out a way that spirituality can be allowed into our lives. And then there has to be effort on the part of the soul. What's the point of the effort? Even the godly soul, but certainly any other souls that we have, right? Like the soul that just powers us and the neutral soul, things like that. To make sure that our soul is accustomed and to train the soul as to the fact that we're going to be doing meditation now and it's going to take time and we should be patient and that it's not a burden. It's not like, oh, I need to meditate now. It's a part of the joy and the necessities of serving God. And of course the Alter Rebbe ends off, and this is we're at the end of not at the end, sorry. The Alter Rebbe ends off that this is like everything, this depends each person on their level. In other words, and not just on their level. If you have a Jew who was born a more subdued person, he doesn't have as many passions, therefore he doesn't get himself into as much trouble, etc. So somebody like that might need less meditation in order to become more spiritual. Certain people are more in tune with spirituality and more refined and more removed from the material, and the material means less to them. Right? You see, even just like on a very basic level, some people are more into their food than other people. Some people are like, yeah, food is whatever, and they're into it, and they know the nuances and the difference, and they like food, and they salivate over. And some people, they eat, you need to eat, whatever, but that's not the main focus in their lives. Not even because they're necessarily such spiritual people, but those people, it'll be easier for them to get into spirituality because they're less involved in the material. So the meditation depends on you and where you're holding in the moment, and could be even natural things that happen in your life. That either made you more or less connected to God, right? Somebody could have had many sins when he was younger that he did with his body that now are standing in his way. And yes, that does mean that he needs more meditation. This life is a journey between the physical and the spiritual, and the more we're involved in the material, the more we involve ourselves, whether that's in a good way, in a neutral way, in a bad way, whatever it is, that's going to make that we're going to need more meditation in order to connect to God on a more direct level. But, the Alter Rebbe ends off, every single Jew can attain that level of lower reverence with enough effort. Depending on where you're holding. Mm-hmm. And that's because we have this treasure trove of feeling for God inside of us. And again, that ties into that spark of Moshe Rabbeinu, which every single one of us has inside of us. And with this, we're concluding section 2. So we're on to section 3 now, which was the long one and the nuance that I want to make sure is everybody with me here?
Yeah.
The
Yes.
main thing about meditation, I was thinking this morning that the word Pashuv and Choshev, Lachshov, to think the same thing. When you think well, that thinking becomes important.
That's very interesting. I did not know that. I never heard that before. I never paid attention to the fact that those 2 words have the same root. Chashuv, which in Hebrew means importance.
Referring to answer, and also means Teshuvah. Teshuvah means answer.
It also means to return to God. Anyways, okay, everybody with me here? So section 3. this is where the Alter Rebbe begins to flesh it out. What does it mean? How do we do it? So the Alter Rebbe says, the Alter Rebbe reminds us that we have this deductive muscle, quote unquote, in our brain that was given to us for a reason, right? For lack of a better word, science, right? One of the best tools that we can use for meditation about God is science. Obviously, understanding science from a Jewish perspective, not from a perspective which many scientists choose to take, which is that science doesn't believe in God because we haven't proven God's existence yet. No. But the concept of science, or in other words, deduction, the fact that we can go about this world and look at this world, right, and see God's existence is an amazing tool for meditation. Says the Alter Rebbe, a simple meditation, the most basic meditation you can ever have, is awareness that Hashem exists, that He cares about what we do. I apologize. I have to back up. I skipped a point. The Mishnah in Avot, the Mishnah in I skipped. I'm sorry. I skipped to section 4. We're really holding section 3. How God knows this world, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a quote in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of Our Fathers, which tells us that you should think of 3 things. A person should always remember 3 things in his mind, and he will never come to transgress the will of Hashem. What are those 3 things?
Remember that where you are coming from, where you are going, and where you are going, where you come from, and where you are been from.
Right. So that's one list of 3 things. There's another list of 3 things that you should always remember, which are that there's an eye
that sees you.
There's always an eye that sees you. There's always an ear that hears everything that's going on. And that everything that you do in this world is being written down in the book of remembrance. 3 things. Always remember these 3 things, and you'll never come to do an Avera, right? And it's very practical, right? It's very. If you know that you're being held accountable. Now let me ask you a question. We have always heard. What?
I only see 2.
An eye that sees, an ear that hears, and all of your actions are written down in a book. Oh, right. Okay, fine. So here we're talking about the eye that sees and the ear that hears. The question becomes, are these things? Because everything being written down in a book, okay, we understand there's no actual book with an actual hand that's writing it, but why are we using these terms, eyes and ears, about God? Right? Why are we using these very physical terms? And like human body parts, like why we couldn't figure out a different way, why we couldn't just say God holds us accountable and God realizes what we do and He's constantly remembering everything we do and He cares about everything that we do. So one of the best analogies for this is a human term is used specifically here because we want to talk about the fact that Hashem listens and feels what we're doing, or in other words, fills this world and holds this world accountable in the same way that a human being has control over his body. Well, not has control. Let's say feels his body, is conscious of his body. Have you ever noticed that you can get a tiny little burn on a tiny little corner of like your pinky toe nail and whatever, but you feel it and you know exactly where it is, even if it's not bothering you that much, right? You're going into the pool or into a hot tub and it's a drop too warm. You stick your tiny edge of the pinky toe. You know exactly how warm it is. You would think your brain is so busy with all the different things that are going on inside your brain, and there could be so much going on. How does it have time or effort? But that's the way Hashem created the human body, and maybe for this reason, like that, we're conscious. Everything that's in our body, we are super conscious of it. We're super conscious. If we get touched anywhere, we know exactly where we were touched. We have this like touch memory. Right? So much so that, right, anybody ever did this? This is not an analogy that's given in Torah, but like when you put a finger on the bottom of a table and a finger at the top of the table, you can somehow know exactly where they are, even though you don't see them with your eyes. There's this consciousness of exactly what's going on with our bodies, for the most part. What?
He's feeling.
Yeah, it's a feeling. That feeling that we know that we have over our bodies, right? Part of the phrase, even though it's obviously not accurate, but right, I know that person or I know that city like the back of my hand. Mm-hmm. Obviously, nobody really knows the back of their hand, right? But the concept is like of course my hand, the back of my, of course I know it. It's my body. I know what's going on with my body. In that same way that we're conscious of everything that's going on, that's what Pirkei Avot is trying to tell us. That's how God is conscious of what's going on in this world. Like the Rambam says, God knows, and we actually did this when we were studying the philosophy a couple of weeks back of the Rambam in the first 2 chapters. One of the terms that the Rambam uses is that he does not know the world as something that is outside of him. Right at the beginning of Maimonides' book, the Mishnah Torah, which we have here on the shelf, the Sefer Hayad, he introduces the fact we have to believe in God and what is God. He introduces him as the first existence and everything. Then he says, and it's important for us to realize that God doesn't know this world biyadiyah shehi chutz mimenu. He doesn't know the world as an existence that's outside of him, but rather as he knows himself, right? And that's the great analogy. The same way, what?
Not as separate from.
Correct. So just as you, right? Me and you. So I don't know. What's something, Baron? What's the thing you know best in this world? I don't know. Your watch, your clothing, maybe your bed, things you're intimately familiar with and you've known for many, many years. What was that?
Forefathers.
No. I don't mean that. I mean something physically. Right? You can know something very physical, know very, very well. I don't know. These keys, I know them very, very well. You know, I don't even need to see anything to know exactly which key is which. There's like 8 keys on here. Most people look at it and they get confused. But I use them every single day. And imagine if it wasn't just for 2 years since I moved here, imagine if it was like the same keys for 50 years. That's something you know very well. But still, the knowledge with which you know it is a knowledge that's outside of you. I have chosen to take my knowledge and know about something that's outside of me. Right? So if, for instance, it gets chipped and I don't know it got chipped, that's a possibility. The very fact that's a possibility shows that it's not the same way. Nobody's chipping my pinky toe and I don't know it. Right? So in that way, Hashem knows the world. The Rebbe points out that it's even a step further. This analogy says that there was not even fear. Why? Because we are affected by bodily discomfort. In other words, the way we know our body, in terms of being an analogy for how Hashem relates with the world, that's great. But in terms of the fact that the only way we could describe that, whether it's on another object or let's go back to the body, we spoke about burning your pinky toe. When you burn your pinky toe or toenail or whatever it is, it affects you. Comfort, discomfort, whatever the feeling, it affects you in a certain way. Says the Alter Rebbe, so it's a great analogy for the fact that Hashem is not a separate thing from the world, but it's not such a great analogy because Hashem is not affected by the world. And the Alter Rebbe brings all sorts of Kabbalistic and Torah sources for this, and the Talmud, etc. But then the Alter Rebbe reminds us that every Jew knows this inherently and naturally. And that's why every single morning when we daven, one of the things that we say is, Atahu ad shelo nivra olam and Atahu misha nivra olam. You are God, the same before the world was created and after the world was created. In other words, the world doesn't have any effect on God. With this we conclude step 3, which is basically step 1 of understanding God's presence here in this world. God is one with the world. And he's so one with the world that he doesn't, it's not something that he knows the world. Hu aman, hu ayadu, it's all the same. It is him. And now says the Alter Rebbe,
we can meditate.
if we can take that, now we can meditate. Now we can meditate. Because if we can have that simple awareness, finally we can meditate.
No, I'm just taking a breath.
Right. Okay. So now we can meditate. What does that mean? If we can become aware of that simple concept, that Hashem and this world are like a human being and their body, right? And even deeper connected than that. And Hashem cares about everything that we do in this world, right? V'hinei Hashem nitzav alav, we introduced last week, right? Hashem is standing over him and is conscious and cares about every single thing that a human being does in this world, right? That he's gazing at him and he's waiting for him to actually serve him with true passion, with true emotion. Being conscious of that arouses a reverence within somebody, at least on a very basic level. And as necessary, we can repeat that, right? Because that feeling is going to wear off, and then we repeat the meditation from a different perspective if it's getting boring. You come back to other ones you did ages ago, etc. You want that?
I feel like if I really go there just a little bit, it pulls me out of the meditation because it's like, oh, that's just too big to think about. I can't. I
would challenge and say that's the Yetzer Hara, who doesn't want to think about those things. Sorry, Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In other words, it's for everybody it's different. By the way, for some people it's a laziness. I don't think that's what you're describing. But for some people it's a laziness. They're just not interested. It's a lot of work to do it. For some people it's lazy. For other people it's overwhelming. It's like, I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable enough. I can't handle it. So therefore I'm not going there. But if we want to develop a real emotion, by the way, many people, and I won't look at you. I won't look at anybody. But many people do this in their marriages. They're too lazy, or they say it's too overwhelming for me. I don't want to talk about what it means to have a real relationship with somebody, so therefore I'm just not going to. And some people do this and they don't even realize they're doing it, right? We're all familiar with the 50 or 60-year-old in our lives that we know of, right? Who has never been married, and he puts on his ear as if he's completely happy. And perhaps sometimes the reason is, and I'm not saying this is true for everybody. Everybody has their own reasons and their own stories, etc. But sometimes the reason is because they're either too lazy or too scared or too overwhelmed to go down that path of actually developing a relationship with somebody. Yes, having an emotion with God, allowing yourself to actually meditate and to think about Hashem and to let that develop into an emotion is hard work. And it's something that is not going to feel the most comfortable thing. And it's the type of thing, I'll speak for myself, because I'm just usually not a very patient person, takes, zitzfleisch. It's not... It's the one thing in this world that you can't... I mean, not the one thing in this world. There's many things in this world, as I can tell you all too well, that you need to actually, be patient and experience and go through. But certainly relationships with your spouse, and many times over, your relationship with God is going to take, yes, you meditating and thinking about it and putting in effort and investing in it. Yes?
The Rebbe asked another question, is referring to this. When God created the universe, the Rabbi asked, did he leave or did he stay?
A different question, again, beyond the scope of this lesson. I know we're learning Chassidus, and it ties into many different things in Chassidus, but we can't learn all the Chassidus in one day, right? Now, says the Alter Rebbe, at the end of section 4, where we're holding now, this is what we mean when we say, Yira mil sozot resahi, right? That Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jewish people, what do you have to do already? Just fear God. Just have a reverence for God. For Moshe Rabbeinu, in other words, for the spark of Moshe Rabbeinu that we have inside of us, the lower reverence, at this very basic level of fill yourself with the knowledge of recognizing that Hashem fills the entire world, exists in the world, and cares about what we do, that basic level, very attainable, very easy. Anything beyond that is going to take more work. I mean, that takes work too, right? Lower reverence for Moshe Rabbeinu is considered petty. And therefore, for every single one of us, is considered not petty, like in a bad way. Maybe petty was the wrong word that I used in the handout here, but it was considered like small fry. That's doable, and then let's move past that. And now the Alter reminds us that we have what we said before, this deductive muscle, right? So let's turn to section 5 because this is a lot of fun to read in the Tanya as the Alter Rebbe goes through this, because there's a lot of material here. And the reason we're going to read it is because, like I said, it's fun, and it sparks your imagination and the creative side of your brain as to what you could think about for this world. Right? Pam, you want to read for us a little bit?
Yeah, where?
In section 5, on page 542, exercising your deductive muscle.
42. Even with...
Oh no, 1 second. 1 second. No, we're going to jump around a little bit. I apologize. Let's put that aside for now. We'll get to that. For now, the Alter Rebbe reminds us, he says, one of the things we can recognize is that it's nice that we can develop an emotion for God based on the world and based on deductions from the world and recognizing and being aware of everything that's going on in the world. But the Alter Rebbe says, Alter Rebbe reminds us, he says, this, even though this is sort of steps removed from God, right? Because we know we're not actually having a reverence for God. We've sort of managed to find a way to see God in the world, and we're having this reverence for God's creation of the world, and not for God Himself, so to speak. If you could remove the two, right? Which you can't really. So the Alter reminds us that on a very physical level, we do this all the time. Says the Alter Rebbe, but think about a king, right? A physical king in this world. we all talk about the fact that I'm saying on eBay you can buy lots of things. Oh, a hat that was worn by this one, and a thing that was done by that one, and the thing was signed by this person, by that person, etc. Let me ask you a question. Let's take one of the most classic. Right? A baseball that was signed by Babe Ruth goes for what on eBay? I don't know.
$100,000.
Really? Is that accurate?
I'm
Or
just guessing.
you're guessing? Probably something close to it, right? $100,000. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that if you click read more, like there's like a little bit of a description. If you're buying a $100,000 item, suffice it to say you're probably going to read the entire entry, right? If not, also call up the dealer and find out. Do you think it mentions there even once whether Babe Ruth was wearing a glove or not?
Probably
Well, he
not.
couldn't write with a glove.
Whatever. Let's say he could, right? I don't know. One of those baseball gloves, a thin glove.
He could have been wearing
Why not,
gloves
Arnold?
today.
Shouldn't it be of tremendous importance? If he was writing it with a glove, then it was one step removed from him. But if he was writing without a glove, then it was his hand that was holding the pen and writing it.
I see what you're saying. Where we go.
Do you think that would make a difference? Not necessarily. Why? Because it also doesn't mention which pen he used, even though I know that now they make a big deal out of the president, which one he signs, which with, whatever, they use the different pens, different things. But, what was that?
I probably asked those questions.
Whether he was wearing a glove or not? No, I understand. Even if you do ask the question, because you want to know exactly, that's more because you're curious, I think, than anything else. But does it take away from the value of it? Is it the fact that he signed it with a specific pen, unless the pen has a specific value? But the baseball that's signed by him, is it the fact that he signed it with a specific pen? Is it the fact that he was wearing a glove or he wasn't wearing a glove? He was wearing maybe 4 gloves or not? Which jersey was wearing at the time? Was he playing? Did he just finish playing a game? Some of those things might have, value and add value to the thing. Oh, this was the ball that he hit the home run. But it's much more with the fact that who was Babe Ruth? I revere, I have this admiration. I admire Babe Ruth because he played so many games and he hit so many home runs and da 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 da.
And he signed it.
And he signed it, and it's not so much about what he was wearing, it's about him. He signed it. The power that he has and the talent that he has, whatever it is, he signed it, right? Even if whatever it is. Obviously, Al Rebbe doesn't give the example, the analogy of Babe Ruth, but he does give the analogy of a king. And he says back in the day, hugging a king was considered a major thing, right? Now, do you think somebody comes walking into the bar? You guys will never believe what just happened. The king was walking. I hugged the king. You think there's a nudnik in the crowd who gets up and goes, "You didn't hug the king. Was the king wearing a coat?" Yeah. So you hugged the king. You hugged the king's coat. The king's coat was hugging the king's shirt. The king's shirt was hugging the king's undershirt. We don't even know what's under there, but under that was the king. Nudnik. It doesn't even make a difference, right? What? It's true. It doesn't make a difference. The king is the king. And by the way, Al Rebbe points out that when the king is sleeping, you don't even fear or revere the king as much as you do when he's awake. Why? Because it's not so much about the king's body, or the king's nose, or the king's hair. Because proved there were many different kings that look very, very different. Some of them short, some of them tall. It's not like you could only be a king if you're tall, only be a king if you're short. Right? Napoleon managed to instill fear in everybody around him, right? The point here is that there's a power and there's a content of character that the king has. Whether born, assumed, whatever it was back in those days. And in today's day and age, it's about a baseball player or about whatever it is. Right? That content, that's what we're talking about here. Says the Alter Rebbe, the same thing can be applied to the Eibishter. Same thing can be applied to God. When we think about God, does it really make a difference? Of course it makes a difference. The deeper we think, the more connected we'll become with God. But is it not revering God if we revere the action that He created, whatever it is? Let's say the way I get there, this is a very simplistic and almost silly example. That's the way I get there is I think a lion. I'm scared of a lion. A lion is very strong. It's a very, very, it's not even lower reverence. It's like a petty fear, right? But a lion is very strong. A lion is the king of all the beasts. I'm scared of a lion because a lion can be dangerous to me. God created a lion.
Yeah.
Right? Wow! Very simplistic way to get there. But it's so simplistic, but at the same time, it's so true. The lion is God. God is God. The fear that you have is God. So you actually are revering God. Can you get more direct? Can you get deeper? Of course you can. But the point is true. Everybody with me here?
Mm-hmm. Kind of.
Okay.
So can we know God or not?
Can we know God? No. God, or God in His essence? No. Can we know God in His essence? No. We can work towards it, which is the point.
That's why he said to Moses, when Moses said, "Let me see,"
That no one will be able to see me.
yeah. He
Look,
said,
Kilo, you're on the
"I'll show you
Adam
my
B'chai."
back, but I can't.
Anybody who will see, right? Anyone,
לא יראני אדם בחי.
right, Kilo, you're on the Adam. That no man can see me in the. Anyways, so the Alter Rebbe reminds us: let's get used to this deductive perspective. See the world as God's creation and a mechanism to connect Him. Maybe that's the whole purpose that the world was created. Maybe that is. The purpose that the world was created, the purpose why we were created, was so that we should find our connection to God through that. God doesn't expect us to know Him in the infinite way, in the unlimited way that it's not possible for us to even know Him. But we should do whatever we can at our level, and then that is actually knowing God, or I don't know, knowing is the word to revering God. By the way, when we talk about believing in God or trusting in God or faith is good, right? Faith. What's the Hebrew word for faith? Anybody? Emunah. The word emunah in Hebrew, what's amun? What does amun mean? What? Amun. In the Gemara, this is what it means. I don't know what it means.
What does it mean?
It means a professional. It means a professional. And uman b'malachto, uman or amun means that he's like experienced. Right? Amun b'miktzor, right? You say that? Amun or uman b'miktzor? It's the same word, same letters, and the same concept. The idea that a person, right? What is the difference between me and a professional dermatologist? Is it the knowledge that he knows? Okay, so let's say I'll go to med school and I'll study everything that I need to know, and then you got a dermatologist who's one of the top in the world. Is there still not that much of a difference? Of course, there's. The main difference between me and him is not the knowledge that he knows. I could figure that out. It's much more about the experience that he has, right? That experience forms him and changes him, because the more he does it, the more experienced he is in that regard, right? Similarly, with regards to a person, says the Alter Rebbe, the more, what is true emunah? True emunah is being experienced